Welcome to Cafe Stories. I'm Alfie, your host for today's mystery. We're joining Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin today at their New York brownstone with The Rembrandt Ultimatum. This is a tale of priceless art, wartime theft, and the dangerous lengths some will go to protect their secrets. Before we begin, I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from today. Let me know in the comments. Settle in with a warm cup of coffee, stay curious, and let's ease into it. Nero Wolfe and the Rembrandt Ultimatum. Chapter 1. A Proposition at Breakfast. It was a Thursday in May, and I had just finished typing the final report on what we called the Bronson case when Fritz announced breakfast. The spring morning had started with a light rain that had now settled into a steady drumbeat against the brownstone's windows, matching the rhythm of Wolfe's knife and fork as he tackled Fritz's masterpiece of an omelette. I folded the morning paper and placed it beside my plate. "The Gilchrist auction is tomorrow," I remarked, pointing to the headline. "That Rembrandt sketch everyone's talking about. Bidding expected to start at 7 figures. Wolfe's expression didn't change as he chewed methodically. He had 14 ways of eating an egg, and this morning he was employing number 8, which involved precise triangular cuts and a particular arrangement of accompaniments that only Fritz understood. He finished his bite, dabbed his lips with his napkin, and reached for his beer. "I have no interest in the fluctuations of art market hysteria," he said. "You might if you knew what orchids that kind of money could buy," I suggested, serving myself another helping of Fritz's grilled tomatoes. Wolfe made a noise that wasn't quite a grunt and wasn't quite a pfui, but carried elements of both. He was about to respond when the doorbell rang. I glanced at my wristwatch, 8:17. "Early for a client?" I said, "even earlier for company." "See who it is, Archie," Wolfe said, as if there were any chance I'd ignore the bell and keep eating. I went to the front door, pulled it open, and found myself facing a woman in her 40s with the kind of posture you get from carrying heavy books around university corridors for decades. Her grey suit was expensive, but chosen for durability rather than fashion, and her umbrella was dripping onto our stoop. "Good morning," she said, with the crisp precision of someone used to lecturing distracted students. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Vance, curator of Dutch Masters at the Metropolitan Museum. I need to see Nero Wolfe immediately." "He's at breakfast," I said. "He doesn't conduct business until 11, but if you'd like to leave your—" "This concerns the Gilchrist auction," she interrupted, "and the murder of James Hobart." That stopped me. "Murder?" "The auctioneer," she said. "Shot in his office at the Gilchrist Gallery 40 minutes ago. The police are there now. May I come in, Mr. Goodwin? The situation is urgent, and I'm willing to pay Mr. Wolfe's full fee." I hesitated, then stepped aside. 9 minutes to finish breakfast, then we'll see." I escorted her to the front room and went back to the dining room. Wolfe looked up with annoyance clearly visible in the slight furrow of his brow. "A Dr. Eleanor Vance from the Metropolitan Museum," I reported, "says the auctioneer for tomorrow's Rembrandt sale was murdered this morning. Shot. She wants to hire you." Wolfe frowned. "At this hour?" "Pfui." "She mentioned your full fee," I added. The furrow in his brow deepened slightly. "Finish your breakfast, Archie." I did, though watching Wolfe deliberately savor each remaining bite while a potential client with news of a murder waited seemed particularly self-indulgent, even for him. At 8:26, he pushed back from the table, used his napkin, and rose. "Very well." I escorted him to the office, then brought in Dr. Vance. She was standing by the globe, studying it with professional interest when we entered. As I made introductions, she took the red leather chair without being invited, which told me she'd either done her homework on Wolfe's office or was simply accustomed to taking charge. Wolfe got settled in his chair and rang for beer. "You mentioned a murder, madam." James Hobart, chief auctioneer at Gilchrist's, she confirmed. Shot in his office this morning, less than 24 hours before he was to conduct the most significant auction of Dutch masters in a decade. And your interest in this matter? The museum has a substantial stake in tomorrow's auction. The centerpiece is a previously unknown Rembrandt sketch, The Magus at Midnight. It was discovered in the estate of Arnold Whitfield, a somewhat reclusive collector who died 3 months ago. Fritz entered with Wolfe's beer. He poured, Wolfe drank, and Dr. Vance continued. The museum wants to acquire the sketch, but only if it's authentic. I believe Hobart was killed because he discovered something about the provenance of the Rembrandt. That is speculation, Wolfe said. What facts do you have? Hobart called me at 7:15 this morning. He said he had discovered something significant about the Whitfield collection that couldn't wait until after the auction. We arranged to meet at 8:30. When I arrived at the gallery, the police were already there. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. And what do you wish me to do? Determine if the Rembrandt is authentic and find out what Hobart discovered that got him killed. That would require my active participation in matters beyond this office. Then Mr. Goodwin can handle the legwork, she said. The museum is prepared to pay $20,000 for your services. Wolfe lifted his beer and took a long, slow drink. No. Dr. Vance didn't flinch. 40,000. I kept my face impassive, though I wanted to whistle. Wolfe's eyes flicked toward me, then back to Dr. Vance. You seem unusually motivated, Doctor. The museum's reputation is at stake. If we bid on a forgery, or fail to bid on an authentic Rembrandt, my career is finished. And I suspect... She stopped, reconsidered, and changed course. I have reason to believe this goes beyond a single sketch. There are international implications. Wolfe put his beer down. You are being deliberately vague. Because I don't know the full picture, she admitted. That's why I need you. Satisfactory, Wolfe said. I accept the case. I pulled my notebook from my pocket, thinking that if the price of eggs ever matched the inflation rate of Wolfe's fees, we'd need to mortgage the brownstone just to cover breakfast. I spent the next 20 minutes taking notes as Dr. Vance provided details about the auction, the sketch, and the key players at the Gilchrist Gallery. As I wrote, I noticed a curious thing. Despite her earlier urgency, she seemed reluctant to leave. When she finally did, after giving me her card with 3 different phone numbers, I closed the door behind her and returned to the office. Wolfe was leaning back in his chair with his eyes closed, already beginning the process of thinking. The rain continued to beat against the windows, and somewhere in the city, a dead auctioneer's secrets waited to be discovered. Chapter 2. The Gallery of Suspects. I left the brownstone at 11 sharp after Wolfe had retreated to the plant rooms for his morning session with the orchids. The rain had let up, but the sky still threatened, and I took a cab to the Gilchrist Gallery on East 67th Street. The gallery occupied 3 floors of what had once been a limestone mansion. A discreet brass plaque beside the entrance read, Gilchrist Fine Arts and Auctions, established 1937. A uniformed officer stood at the door, checking identification. I showed him my private investigator's license, mentioned Inspector Kramer's name with just enough confidence, and he waved me in. The main gallery was a cathedral to wealth, high ceilings, perfect lighting, and spotless white walls where paintings worth more than most people's lifetime earnings hung like windows into other worlds. A temporary stage had been erected at one end where the auction would take place, or was supposed to take place. Given the morning's events, I wondered if they would postpone. I spotted a cluster of people near a side door marked Staff Only and headed that way. As I approached, a thin man with carefully combed silver hair peeled away from the group and intercepted me. "I'm afraid the gallery is closed to the public today," he said. His accent wasn't quite British, more like American, polished by decades of proximity to old money. "I'm not public," I replied. "Archie Goodwin, representing Nero Wolfe." I extended my card, which he took with manicured fingers. "Harold Gilchrist," he said. "I own this establishment, and I don't recall engaging Mr. Wolfe's services." The Metropolitan Museum did. Dr. Vance is concerned about the Rembrandt sketch. His expression tightened. Eleanor should mind her own affairs. The sketch has been authenticated by 3 independent experts. "I'm sure it has. I'd just like to ask a few questions about Mr. Hobart." Gilchrist glanced toward the staff-only door, where 2 detectives I recognized from homicide were now emerging. "This is hardly the time." "Murder rarely chooses convenient moments," I said pleasantly. "Would you prefer I come back with Inspector Kramer? He and Mr. Wolfe have such stimulating conversations." Gilchrist's nostrils flared slightly. "Very well. Melinda Cress, my assistant auctioneer, can speak with you." He gestured toward a woman standing near the auction podium, reviewing a catalogue. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a police statement to finish." Melinda Cress was around 30, with dark hair pulled back in a practical style and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a charcoal suit with the kind of tailoring that whispers money rather than shouting it. "Mr. Goodwin," she said when I introduced myself. "I knew Mr. Wolfe would be involved eventually. The Rembrandt is simply too important." That surprised me. "You expected us?" "The art world is small, Mr. Goodwin. When something this significant surfaces and then the auctioneer is murdered the day before the sale." She shrugged. Someone like Mr. Wolfe was inevitable. "Tell me about Hobart," I said. James was the best in the business, 20 years at Gilchrist's. He had an eye for authenticity that technology can't match. She looked around the gallery, lowering her voice. He was also impossibly meticulous, every provenance checked and double-checked, every authentication verified independently. "Any enemies in this business?" She gave a short laugh. "Collecting art at this level isn't about aesthetics, Mr. Goodwin. It's about power. James stood between very powerful people and the things they wanted. That creates resentments." "Anyone specific?" She hesitated, then nodded toward a woman examining a Dutch still life across the gallery. "Diane Whitfield, Arnold Whitfield's niece and sole heir. She's been difficult about the auction, wanted to cancel it entirely after her uncle died." I studied the woman. Tall, blonde, early 40s, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about a bill. She wore an emerald pendant that caught the light as she moved. Why would she want to cancel? These pieces must be worth millions. "That's the curious part," Melinda said. "Money isn't an issue for her, but she was adamant that certain pieces, including the Rembrandt, shouldn't be sold. Said her uncle wouldn't have wanted it. James overruled her. The estate planning was clear." I made a note of that. "Anyone else I should know about?" "Victor Lang," she said, gesturing toward a man entering through the main doors. "Runs a rival auction house. He's been trying to poach our clients for years." Lang was short, compact, with the build of a former wrestler who still kept in shape. He moved through the gallery like he owned it, nodding to staff and examining pieces with a critical eye. When he spotted Melinda talking to me, he changed course and headed our way. "Miss Cress," he said, "a tragedy about James. My condolences." "Thank you, Victor." Her tone carried exactly 0 warmth. His eyes shifted to me. "And you are?" "Archie Goodwin." Recognition flickered across his face. Nero Wolfe's man. Interesting. He smiled, showing expensive dental work. "Tell your employer that Lang Auctions would be happy to step in and handle tomorrow's event, given the circumstances." "Vultures circle quickly," Melinda murmured. Lang's smile didn't waver. "Just offering professional courtesy. This auction requires experienced handling." He turned back to me. If you're investigating, Mr. Goodwin, you might ask why Hobart was making calls to Amsterdam last night. Unusual for a man who should have been focused on tomorrow's event. Before I could respond, he gave a small bow and moved away, stopping to speak with Diane Whitfield, who greeted him with obvious familiarity. "How would he know about calls to Amsterdam?" I asked Melinda. "That's what makes Victor dangerous," she replied. "He always knows things he shouldn't." As we talked, I noticed a man in a grey suit taking notes in a small leather notebook. He wasn't police. I knew most of the detectives in homicide, and he had the watchful patience of someone in my line of work. "Who's that?" I asked. Melinda followed my gaze. "Martin Reeves, from Strathmore Investigations. The insurance company hired them yesterday." "To investigate what?" "I don't know, but he's been asking questions about the Rembrandt and examining our security protocols." The plot was thickening faster than one of Fritz's roux. I spent another hour at the gallery examining the auction catalogue and making notes about the Rembrandt sketch, which was conspicuously absent from display. "Security concerns," Melinda explained. "It would only be revealed during the actual auction." Before leaving, I secured invitations to that evening's pre-auction reception at the museum. Technically, they weren't mine to give, but Melinda seemed grateful for a sympathetic ear and wrote my name +1 on the guest list. I left the gallery just as Martin Reeves was getting into a black sedan. Our eyes met briefly, a moment of professional recognition, before he pulled away from the curb. Back on the sidewalk, I hailed a cab. The spring air had turned cooler, and a few drops of rain began to fall. By the time I reached the brownstone, I had 4 names at the top of my list, and a nagging sense that what had happened to James Hobart was just the beginning. Chapter 3. Cultural Diversions. I reported to Wolfe at 4 o'clock after his afternoon session with the orchids. He sat behind his desk, freshly showered, and changed into a clean yellow shirt, listening with his eyes half closed as I detailed my findings at the Gilchrist Gallery. So we have the gallery owner, the niece, who didn't want the auction to happen, the rival auctioneer hoping to take over, and the assistant who's now been promoted by circumstance, Wolfe summarized when I finished. And this rival detective from Strathmore Investigations. Plus Dr. Vance, who was suspiciously quick to hire you, I added. She had Hobart's time of death almost before the police did. Wolfe's eyes opened fully. Indeed. He pushed a button on his desk. "Fritz, beer." While Fritz was bringing the beer, I continued. "There's a pre-auction reception at the museum tonight. I'm on the guest list +1. "Saul will accompany you," Wolfe said. That surprised me. Saul Panzer was the best operative in New York, better than me in some ways, though I'd never admit it to his face, and using him this early meant Wolfe was taking the case seriously. What's Saul looking for? I have given him specific instructions. Wolfe lifted his beer and took a long drink. You will observe the interactions between our principals, particularly Dr. Vance and Diane Whitfield. What about the Rembrandt sketch? If it's displayed, note every detail. If not, determine its location. And what will you be doing while we're risking indigestion on museum canapes? Wolfe's expression didn't change. I have arranged for a visitor at 7, an expert in Dutch masters from Columbia University. I grinned. You're actually interested in this case? $40,000 demands interest, Archie. Now go dress. The reception begins at 6:30. The Metropolitan Museum at night is a different creature than its daytime self. With the regular visitors gone and the lights dimmed in most galleries, it takes on a conspiratorial atmosphere, as if the art is finally free to whisper its secrets across the marble halls. The reception was being held in the European Paintings Wing, where soft lighting and strategically placed floral arrangements transformed the gallery into an elegant event space. A string quartet played Vivaldi in one corner, and uniformed staff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Saul arrived separately, as we'd arranged. In his perfectly tailored tuxedo, he looked like any other patron of the arts, though I knew his capacity for observation exceeded anyone else in the room. We acknowledged each other with the briefest of nods before he drifted toward the service areas. I spotted Dr. Vance near a Vermeer, deep in conversation with a museum board member. She wore a midnight blue dress that managed to be both appropriate for her position and flattering to her academic frame. When she saw me, she excused herself and came over. "Mr. Goodwin, I didn't expect to see you here." "Mr. Wolfe likes to be thorough," I said. "Has the auction been postponed due to Hobart's murder?" "Number Ms. Cress will conduct it tomorrow as scheduled." She sipped her champagne. "Harold Gilchrist was quite insistent. He claims it's what James would have wanted. Convenient for someone who stands to earn hefty commissions." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed, though I suspect there's more urgency than mere commission." "Such as—" Before she could answer, we were interrupted by Diane Whitfield, resplendent in a red gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. The emerald pendant I'd noticed earlier gleamed at her throat. "Eleanor," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your companion?" Dr. Vance performed the introduction with academic precision. "Ms. Whitfield is our guest of honor tonight, as her uncle's collection is the centerpiece of tomorrow's auction." "A pleasure," I said. "I understand you had reservations about selling the collection." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. "You're well informed for a museum guest, Mr. Goodwin." "I'm representing Nero Wolfe," I said, watching for her reaction. It came, a slight stiffening of her shoulders quickly masked. "The detective? How fascinating. Is art theft now within his purview?" "Murder certainly is," I replied pleasantly. "How macabre to bring that up at an event like this." She glanced around the gallery. "Excuse me, I see someone I must speak with." She moved away with practiced grace, but I noticed she headed straight for Victor Lang, who was examining a small Rembrandt oil painting with exaggerated interest. "She's hiding something," Dr. Vance murmured. "Most people are," I replied. "Where's the sketch?" "I don't see it on display." In a secure room adjacent to the gallery, was showing it to select potential bidders in private viewings throughout the evening. "I'd like to see it?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Follow me in 2 minutes. Try to be discreet." As she walked away, I surveyed the room. Harold Gilchrist was holding court near the entrance, while Melinda Cress stood slightly apart, watching the proceedings with a professional eye. I caught a glimpse of Saul speaking with one of the catering staff. Then I noticed Martin Reeves from Strathmore Investigations. He was better dressed than at the gallery, but still had that watchful quality that marks our profession. When our eyes met, he gave me a slight nod and began moving in my direction. "Mr. Goodwin," he said when he reached me, "twice in one day, the art world must be more interesting than I realized." "Just following the money," I replied, though I could say the same about you. "Insurance investigators go where the risk is." He smiled thinly. "And a 7-figure Rembrandt carries considerable risk, especially when the auctioneer handling it turns up dead." "Especially then." His eyes moved past me, tracking Dr. Vance as she slipped through a side door. "Word of advice, Goodwin?" Some questions are better left unasked, particularly about wartime acquisitions. Before I could respond, he walked away, leaving me with another piece for Wolfe's puzzle. I waited another 30 seconds, then followed the path Dr. Vance had taken. The side door led to a short corridor and another door with a keypad lock. A security guard stood beside it but stepped aside when he saw me. "Dr. Vance is expecting me," I said, and he nodded. Inside was a small viewing room with perfect lighting and a single piece displayed on a freestanding easel. Dr. Vance stood before it, her expression reverent. "The Magus at Midnight," she said without turning. "One of Rembrandt's most intimate works." I moved beside her and looked at the sketch. It was smaller than I'd expected, perhaps 8 by 10 inches, rendered in sepia ink on yellowed paper. It showed an old man bent over ancient texts, his face illuminated by a single candle. The play of light and shadow was extraordinary, conveying both wisdom and weariness in a few masterful strokes. "Worth killing for?" I asked. "Worth millions, certainly." She turned to face me. "But I suspect James wasn't killed over the sketch itself, but what he discovered about it." "Which was?" Her reply was interrupted by a commotion from the main gallery, raised voices and the sound of breaking glass. I was through the door before she could stop me. In the centre of the gallery, Victor Lang and Harold Gilchrist stood toe-to-toe, surrounded by startled guests. A shattered champagne flute lay on the marble floor between them. "You knew," Lang was saying, his face flushed with anger, or alcohol, or both. "You knew and you let it go forward anyway." Gilchrist's normally composed face was tight with fury. "This is neither the time nor place, Victor." Melinda Cress appeared between them, her voice low but commanding. "Gentlemen, please. There are important clients present." They separated reluctantly, and the quartet, which had stopped playing during the confrontation, resumed their Vivaldi. The crowd's attention dispersed, though I noticed Saul had positioned himself where he could hear any further exchange. I felt a presence at my elbow and turned to find Diane Whitfield. "Well, Mr. Goodwin," she said softly, "still think my uncle's collection is worth Nero Wolfe's attention?" "More than ever," I replied. Her smile was cool and calculating. "When this is over, perhaps we should have a private conversation. There are aspects to this situation that might interest your employer." With that cryptic offer, she glided away, leaving me to wonder what game she was playing. I caught Saul's eye and indicated it was time to leave. Whatever was happening around the Rembrandt sketch, we had gathered enough for Wolfe to begin forming his web. Outside, the spring night had turned clear and cool. Stars were visible despite the city lights, reminding me that in Rembrandt's time, the night sky would have been a canopy of brilliance. Secrets, like stars, endured across centuries, but unlike stars, secrets had a way of burning those who kept them. Chapter 4. Ink and Implications. I was at my desk typing up my notes from the museum reception when the doorbell rang at precisely 11 the next morning. Wolfe was at his desk reviewing the preliminary report Saul had delivered at breakfast, a document that had raised Wolfe's eyebrows twice, which counted as extreme excitement in his emotional range. I went to the front door and found a small, round man with a fringe of white hair circling an otherwise bald head. Wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose, and he carried a worn leather briefcase that looked like it had accompanied him through decades of academic life. "Dr. Hendrik van Rijn," he announced in a voice that carried a slight Dutch accent. "Mr. Wolfe is expecting me." I escorted him to the office, where Wolfe greeted him with a nod. "Dr. van Rijn, thank you for coming. For a chance to discuss Rembrandt with someone who appreciates genius, a pleasure." Van Rijn settled into the red leather chair without ceremony. "Though I understand there are more pressing concerns than aesthetic appreciation." "A man has been murdered," Wolfe confirmed. "What can you tell me about wartime art theft and forgery techniques, particularly regarding Dutch masters?" Van Rijn placed his briefcase on his lap and opened it with practiced movements. "During the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, approximately 20% of Dutch cultural treasures were looted. Some went directly to German collections, others were sold on the black market to fund the war effort." He removed a folder and placed several photographs on Wolfe's desk. "These are some of the works still missing. The provenance of many pieces becomes murky after 1940. Wolfe examined the photographs without touching them. "And forgeries?" "A thriving industry both during and after the war," Van Rijn said. "Paper and ink from the period are not impossible to obtain. A skilled forger with access to original works could create convincing imitations, especially of sketches which are less complex than oils." "How would you authenticate such a sketch?" Wolfe asked. Van Rijn removed his glasses and polished them with a handkerchief. Chemical analysis of the ink, microscopic examination of the paper fibers and pen strokes, historical research into the subject matter and its relationship to the artist's known works. He replaced his glasses, but the most telling is often the provenance, the documented history of ownership. And if that history had gaps. During the war years, not unusual, many works changed hands under duress, records were destroyed, collections scattered. Van Rijn's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is this about the Whitfield Rembrandt?" Wolfe's eyebrows lifted a fraction. "You're familiar with it?" "The art world is a small one, Mr. Wolfe. The Magus at Midnight was unknown until 3 months ago. Now it's the centerpiece of today's auction." Van Rijn leaned forward. "I've only seen photographs, but the technique appears consistent with Rembrandt's late sketches. The question is—" The doorbell interrupted him, and I went to answer it. Inspector Kramer stood on the stoop, chewing an unlit cigar and looking like he'd slept in his clothes. "Goodwin," he growled. "Where is he?" "Enjoying a civilized conversation about art," I replied. "Something I assume you're here to disrupt." Kramer pushed past me. "I've got 3 separate reports of you and Saul Panzer at the museum last night, asking questions about a murdered auctioneer." "Free country," I noted, following him to the office. Kramer stopped short when he saw Van Rijn. "Who's this?" "Dr. Hendrik Van Rijn," Wolfe said, "an expert consulting on a case, Inspector Kramer of homicide." Van Rijn nodded politely. "Perhaps I should return later?" "No," Wolfe said. "The inspector won't be staying long." Kramer's face reddened slightly, but he controlled himself. "Since when are you interested in art, Wolfe?" "I'm not," Wolfe replied. "I'm interested in murder." Hobart was shot once in the back of the head. Small caliber, professional. No witnesses, no disturbance. Kramer chewed his cigar. "And I find Nero Wolfe's fingerprints all over my investigation less than 24 hours later." "Figuratively speaking," Wolfe murmured. "Does the name Anton Schiller mean anything to you?" Kramer demanded. I saw Van Rijn's posture stiffen slightly, though his expression remained neutral. "Should it?" Wolfe asked. "He's an art dealer based in Amsterdam. Hobart called him the night before he was killed. Twice." Kramer fixed his gaze on Wolfe. "Now why would an auctioneer call an Amsterdam dealer the night before a major auction?" "I couldn't say. But you've been hired to find out, haven't you? By who?" "The museum? Gilchrist?" "My client's identity is confidential," Wolfe said. Kramer removed the cigar from his mouth and pointed it at Wolfe. "Stay out of my investigation." "I have no intention of interfering with the police," Wolfe assured him. "But I cannot abandon my client's interests." "Your client's interests and my homicide case are the same thing," Kramer said, "and I don't need you muddying the waters." The phone rang, and I answered it. Nero Wolfe's office, Archie Goodwin speaking. "Mr. Goodwin, this is Melinda Kress from Gilchrist Gallery." Her voice was tense, controlled. "There's been a development you should know about." "What kind of development?" "A second Rembrandt sketch has been presented for authentication. It appears identical to the one we're auctioning today." I felt my eyebrows rise. "When did this happen?" "An hour ago, a private collector contacted us. Says he's owned it for decades." She lowered her voice. "Mr. Goodwin, one of them has to be a forgery. Have you told the police? Not yet. Harold is evaluating the situation. Meaning deciding which one to sell as genuine, I translated. I can't comment on that. The auction begins at 2 o'clock. She paused. I thought Mr. Wolfe would want to know. He will. Thank you. I hung up and relayed the conversation to the room. Kramer's expression darkened. You see what happens when you stick your nose in, Wolfe? Now we have 2 sketches and still 1 dead auctioneer. Fascinating, Van Ryn murmured, a classic authentication dilemma. Wolfe's eyes were half closed, a sign he was thinking. Inspector, your investigation would benefit from determining which sketch is genuine. And I suppose you're going to tell me? When I know, perhaps. Kramer jammed his cigar back in his mouth. I'm going to the gallery. And Wolfe, if I find you've withheld evidence. He left the threat unfinished and stormed out. I showed him to the door, then returned to the office. Are you attending the auction, Mr. Wolfe? Van Ryn asked. No, Wolfe said, but Archie will be there, with a notebook and a camera if possible. And very specific instructions, I imagine, I added. Wolfe nodded. Dr. Van Ryn, what would you require to authenticate a Rembrandt sketch? Proper equipment, good lighting, and comparative samples if possible. Could you make a preliminary judgment based on photographs? Perhaps, Van Ryn said cautiously, though not with legal certainty. Wolfe pushed a button on his desk. Fritz, beer for myself and Dr. Van Ryn. Archie, call Fred and Ori. I want surveillance on Anton Schiller if he's in New York, or his known associates if he's not. As I reached for the phone, I thought about the second sketch and what it meant. If one was a forgery, then Hobart's murder took on new dimensions. Authenticating the wrong Rembrandt could cost the museum millions and ruin reputations. For the forger, exposure meant disgrace and possible criminal charges. Either way, we were no longer just looking for a murderer, but a sophisticated art criminal, someone with the skill to create a forgery good enough to fool experts and the ruthlessness to kill anyone who might expose the deception. Outside, the spring day had bloomed into perfection, with clear skies and flowering trees along the brownstone-lined streets. But in Wolfe's office, with the yellow curtains drawn against the brightness, we were entering darker territory, a labyrinth of deception where artistic genius served as camouflage for something far more sinister. Chapter 5. A Matter of Provenance. I arrived at the Gilchrist Gallery 15 minutes before the auction was scheduled to begin. The main room had been transformed with rows of chairs facing the podium, and the walls were lined with the Whitfield collection pieces ready for sale. Security had been doubled since my last visit, uniformed guards at every entrance, and plainclothes men with earpieces strategically positioned throughout the space. I spotted Diane Whitfield in the front row, wearing a conservative black suit that managed to look both expensive and severe. Dr. Vance was 3 rows behind her, consulting notes and occasionally glancing toward the auction podium, where Harold Gilchrist was in deep conversation with a man I didn't recognize. There was no sign of the rival detective Martin Reeves, but Inspector Kramer had taken up position near a side exit, looking as comfortable as a vegetarian at a butcher's convention. When he saw me, he made a point of checking his watch and scowling. I worked my way toward Melinda Kress, who was reviewing the auction catalogue with the intensity of a general studying battle plans. "Which sketch is being sold?" I asked, without preamble. She glanced up, her expression guarded. "The authentic one, of course. And how was that determined?" "Mr. Gilchrist consulted with our authentication team." She lowered her voice. "The second sketch was rejected. It's good, but there are discrepancies in the paper composition." "Where is it now?" "Secure storage, until the police decide what to do with it." She glanced toward Kramer. The owner insists it's been in his family since the 1950s with documentation to prove it. Does this owner have a name? Warren Chambers, a private collector from Boston. I made a mental note. And the provenance of your sketch. Acquired by Arnold Whitfield in Switzerland in 1957, he had extensive documentation. She hesitated, though James did mention some concerns the day before he died. What kind of concerns? He didn't elaborate, just said something about irregularities in the transfer records. She straightened her auction paddle list. I need to begin soon, Mr. Goodwin. I stepped back, surveying the room again. Victor Lang had arrived and was speaking with a group of potential bidders. His manner was animated, almost theatrical, a stark contrast to the subdued atmosphere elsewhere in the gallery. I worked my way toward the display area, where items were arranged for final viewing before the bidding. The Rembrandt sketch, whichever version had been deemed authentic, was prominently displayed in a protective case with perfect lighting. I studied it carefully, taking mental notes for Wolfe and wishing I'd paid more attention during the art appreciation classes I'd skipped in school. Beautiful, isn't it? A voice said beside me. I turned to find Diane Whitfield studying my reaction rather than the sketch. I'm more of a sports page man myself, I replied, but even I can appreciate genius. My uncle collected Rembrandt for 40 years, she said. He believed the artist's sketches revealed more truth than his commissioned paintings. Truth seems to be in short supply around this particular sketch. Her perfectly shaped eyebrows raised slightly. How so? A second version appearing just hours before the auction seems convenient. Or suspicious, she countered. Depends on which side you're viewing it from. Which side are you on, Ms. Whitfield? Her smile was practiced, professional. The side of my uncle's legacy, Mr. Goodwin, nothing more. Is that why you tried to cancel the auction? Something flickered in her eyes. Anger, maybe, or calculation. You're well informed. Did Dr. Vance tell you that? Does it matter? Perhaps not. She adjusted her emerald pendant, drawing my attention to it deliberately. My uncle acquired certain pieces under complicated circumstances. I merely wished to ensure everything was handled appropriately. By keeping the sketch off the market. By respecting his wishes. She glanced around the gallery. The auction begins in 5 minutes. Will you be bidding, Mr. Goodwin? Just observing. A shame. I was curious what Nero Wolfe might want with a Rembrandt. She moved away with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to controlling conversations. I found a position at the back of the room as the auction began. Melinda Cress took the podium with professional confidence, and for the next hour, paintings and sculptures from the Whitfield collection changed hands for sums that could have funded small nations. When the Rembrandt sketch came up, the room tensed noticeably. Bidding started at 1 million and escalated rapidly. Dr. Vance bid consistently until 2 million, then dropped out. The battle continued between an anonymous phone bidder, Victor Lang, representing a client, he announced, and a silver-haired man in the third row I didn't recognize. At 4.2 million, the sketch sold to the phone bidder. I watched Dr. Vance's face, a mixture of disappointment and something else. Relief, perhaps? As the crowd began to disperse after the final lot, I noticed Martin Reeves slip in through a side entrance. He made a direct line for Melinda Cress, spoke briefly to her, then disappeared through a door marked Staff Only. I decided to follow, but my path was blocked by Victor Lang. A fascinating outcome, he said. The museum outbid, the collector thwarted, and an anonymous buyer victorious. You know who bought it? His smile was smug. I have my suspicions. The art world has few true secrets, Mr. Goodwin, only convenient fictions. Like the provenance of certain sketches. His expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. Careful. James Hobart made similar insinuations. Before I could respond, a commotion erupted near the back offices. A uniformed security guard emerged, his face pale. "Call the police," he shouted. "There's been a break-in." Kramer was already moving, badge out. I followed close behind, ignoring his glare. We pushed through to a small office where a wall safe stood open, its contents scattered across the floor. Martin Reeves was there, examining the scene with professional detachment. He glanced up as we entered. "Second Rembrandt sketch is gone," he said to Kramer. "Took it right under your department's nose." Kramer's expression could have curdled milk. "When?" "During the auction. Perfect timing." As Kramer began barking orders into his radio, I slipped out and made my way to the exit. I needed to call Wolfe. I reached the sidewalk just in time to see a black sedan pull away from the curb. In the back seat, unmistakable even in profile, was Diane Whitfield. My taxi ride back to the brownstone was spent composing my report to Wolfe. The theft of the second sketch, presumably the forgery according to Melinda, added yet another layer to an already complex case. Was the thief protecting the forgery from scrutiny, or removing evidence of a crime? And how did Diane Whitfield's mysterious errand fit into the puzzle? By the time I reached West 35th Street, the afternoon light was fading. I found Wolfe in the office with Saul Panzer, who looked uncharacteristically animated. Whatever he'd discovered had piqued Wolfe's interest. His beer sat untouched beside 3 yellow legal pads covered with notes in his precise handwriting. "Ah, Archie," Wolfe said as I entered. "At last. You may be surprised to learn that our case has taken a most unexpected turn." I hung my hat on the rack. If it involves a stolen sketch, a mysterious buyer, and a woman with an emerald pendant, I may be one step ahead of you. Wolfe leaned back in his chair. "Not ahead, but perhaps adjacent. Sit down. Our path forward has become both clearer and considerably more dangerous." Chapter 6. The Black Market Canvas. Saul Panzer was not a man given to excitement. In the years I'd known him, I'd seen him maintain the same placid expression, whether tracking a murderer through the Bowery or reporting on a society matron's indiscretions. So the fact that he was now leaning forward in his chair, eyes bright with the thrill of discovery, told me we had something extraordinary on our hands. "I spent the morning with contacts at the Art Recovery Foundation," Saul said after I'd given my report on the auction and theft. "They maintain records of artwork stolen during World War II. The database isn't public, but I have a friend there who owed me a favor." Wolfe nodded. "Tell Archie what you found." Saul removed a folded paper from his pocket and smoothed it on the desk. A Rembrandt sketch matching our description was reported stolen from the Bergman family collection in Amsterdam in 1942. The Bergmans were Jewish art dealers. None survived the camps. "Was the sketch recovered?" I asked. "Officially, no. It remained on the missing art registry until 1957, when it was suddenly withdrawn. No explanation was given." 1957, I said. "The same year Whitfield supposedly acquired it in Switzerland." "Precisely," Wolfe said. "Continue, Saul." "I did some digging into Anton Schiller, the Amsterdam dealer Hobart called before his death," Saul said. "He specializes in recovering lost art. Some say he operates in grey areas, buying from questionable sources to return works to legitimate owners." "For a substantial fee," Wolfe added. "Of course," Saul acknowledged. "But here's the interesting part. Schiller arrived in New York 3 days before Hobart's murder and left the morning after. Immigration records confirm it." I whistled softly. "Did they meet?" "According to Schiller's credit card, he had dinner at Arnaud's the night before the murder. I showed Hobart's photograph to the maitre d'. He confirmed they dined together for 2 hours." Wolfe's eyes were half closed, a sign he was processing. "And what of our Mr. Warren Chambers, the supposed owner of the second sketch. "No record of him in any Boston social registry," Saul replied. "The address he provided to the gallery belongs to a mail forwarding service." "Convenient," I remarked. "Indeed," Wolfe said. "Archie, you will visit Dr. Van Ryn this evening. Take photographs of both sketches, yours from the auction and Saul's from the registry. I wish to know if he observes any discrepancies." "I only have photos of the one that was auctioned," I pointed out. "Saul has arranged access to police photographs of the stolen sketch," Wolfe said. "They will be waiting at Dr. Van Ryn's office." The doorbell rang, and Fritz announced Dr. Eleanor Vance. Wolfe instructed him to show her in immediately. Dr. Vance entered, looking considerably less composed than when I'd last seen her. Her hair was slightly dishevelled, and she carried her briefcase with a white-knuckled grip. "The museum withdrew from the bidding on my orders," she said without preamble. "I couldn't in good conscience bid on that sketch." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "Because I believe it's stolen property." She sat down heavily in the red leather chair. "Not a forgery, that would be simpler, but a genuine Rembrandt with a tainted provenance." "Stolen during the war?" I suggested. Her eyes widened slightly. "You know." "We suspect," Wolfe corrected. "What led you to this conclusion?" "James Hobart called me the morning he died because he'd found discrepancies in the transfer documents from Switzerland, gaps in the ownership record that suggested the sketch might have been looted during Nazi occupation." She opened her briefcase and removed a folder. "After the auction, I received this anonymously." She placed a document on Wolfe's desk. It was a photograph of a ledger entry dated 1957 with German text and what appeared to be inventory numbers. "A sales record," Wolfe said, "from a notorious dealer who helped launder stolen art after the war," Dr. Vance confirmed. "The entry matches the Rembrandt sketch's dimensions and description. If authentic, this proves the sketch sold today was once looted property, which would make the sale invalid under international law," I noted, "and potentially criminal under US statutes," she added. "The museum can't be associated with such a piece regardless of its artistic merit." Wolfe studied the document. "Do you know who purchased the sketch today?" "An anonymous buyer through a Swiss bank." Her expression was grim. "It will disappear into a private collection, probably never to be seen again publicly. Unless the provenance issues become widely known," Wolfe mused. "Which is why James was killed," Dr. Vance said. "He was going to expose the sketch's history and halt the auction." "A theory," Wolfe said. "Not yet a conclusion." After Dr. Vance left, I prepared to visit Dr. Van Ryn. The spring evening had turned cool, and I opted for a light trench coat. As I was leaving, Wolfe called me back. "Archie, observe with particular attention any differences in the ink. I have a hypothesis I wish to test." "About which sketch is genuine?" "About whether either is genuine in the way we've been assuming." That cryptic instruction accompanied me to Columbia University, where Dr. Van Ryn kept an office. The academic halls were quiet at that hour, with only the occasional graduate student hurrying past with an armload of books. I found Van Ryn's door at the end of a poorly lit corridor. He greeted me with enthusiasm disproportionate to the hour, ushering me into an office that resembled an explosion in a library. Books, papers, and photographs covered every surface, yet he navigated the chaos with the confidence of a man who knows precisely where everything is. "The police photographs arrived," he said, retrieving a manila envelope from a precarious stack. "And you have images of the auctioned sketch?" I handed him the high-resolution photos I'd taken with a small camera during the auction. Van Ryn spread all the images on his desk and produced a magnifying glass from a drawer. For the next hour, he studied the photographs with meticulous attention, occasionally making notes or comparing details. Finally, he looked up, his expression troubled. Mr. Goodwin, I notice something peculiar about these sketches. Besides being identical. Not identical, he corrected. Similar certainly to an extraordinary degree, but there are subtle differences in the weight of certain lines, in the shading techniques. He pointed to specific areas with his pencil. More importantly, the ink composition appears different. How can you tell from photographs? I can't be certain without chemical analysis, he admitted. But I've studied Rembrandt's materials for 40 years. The tonal values suggest different ink compositions. He removed his glasses, polishing them with a handkerchief. The truly puzzling thing is that both display characteristics authentic to Rembrandt's period and technique. Meaning? Meaning either we have two original sketches with minor variations, not unknown in Rembrandt's work, or we have one original and one forgery of exceptional quality. He replaced his glasses. Or something else entirely. What else could it be? Van Rijn's expression turned grave. There were forgers in Amsterdam during the occupation, Jewish artists forced to create replicas of masterpieces for Nazi officials. Some were so skilled that their work has been mistaken for originals. The implication hung in the air between us. A forgery created under duress, perhaps by someone who didn't survive the war. A copy that had, through the strange alchemy of history and tragedy, acquired its own legitimacy. Outside the campus clock struck 10, its deep tones echoing through the empty corridors. I thanked Van Rijn and gathered the photographs, my mind turning over this new piece of the puzzle. As I hailed a taxi back to the brownstone, I thought about Wolfe's instruction to pay attention to the ink. He had seen something, or suspected something, that the rest of us had missed. The taxi curved through the darkened streets of Manhattan, passing pools of lamplight that illuminated brief vignettes of city life, a couple arguing on a corner, a late-night food vendor, a solitary figure hurrying with collar turned up against the night air. Strangers, each carrying their own secrets, just as the Rembrandt sketch carried its history of theft, deception, and now murder. Chapter 7. The Private Collection. I returned to the brownstone just past 11 to find Fred Durkin waiting in the front room. Fred was solid and dependable, if not blessed with Saul's finesse, and the fact that he was still there at that hour meant he had something worth reporting. "Wolfe is expecting you," Fritz informed me, taking my coat. "He asked that you join them immediately." I found Wolfe at his desk with Fred, seated in the red leather chair, looking uncomfortable as he always did in that office. The yellow pads in front of Wolfe now had additional notes, and 3 empty beer bottles stood on his desk, a sign of extended concentration. "Ah, Archie," Wolfe greeted me. "Fred has been sharing some interesting observations about Miss Whitfield." Fred nodded at me. "I followed her after the auction, like you asked. She didn't go home or back to her office, went straight to the Carlisle Hotel, up to suite 1214. "Anton Schiller's room?" Wolfe supplied. I raised my eyebrows. "Our Amsterdam art dealer is still in town." "Under a different name," Fred confirmed, "registered as Heinrich Müller. But it's him, same guy in the photos Saul showed me." "How long was she there?" 47 minutes. When she came out, she was carrying a slim leather portfolio she didn't have when she went in. Fred shifted, clearly pleased with his thoroughness. Then she took a car to Newark Liberty International, private aviation terminal. "A flight?" Wolfe asked. Fred nodded. "Scheduled for midnight. I couldn't get close enough to see where it's headed, but it's a private charter. Gulfstream." Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did she board?" "Not while I was watching. I left Ori there to follow through." Fred glanced at his watch. "Should be hearing from him soon." The phone rang at that moment and I picked it up. "Nero Wolfe's residence. Archie Goodwin speaking." "It's Ori," came the reply. "She's still in the terminal lounge, flights delayed due to mechanical issues. But get this, Victor Lang just showed up. They're talking, and it doesn't look friendly." I relayed this to Wolfe and Fred, then asked, "Anyone else of interest?" "Yeah, that Reeves guy, the insurance investigator. He's keeping his distance, but he's definitely watching them." "Stay with it," I instructed. "Call if they move." After hanging up, I filled Wolfe in on my meeting with Dr. Van Rijn. He listened without interruption, his eyes half closed, fingers lightly stroking the arm of his chair. "Satisfactory," he said when I finished. "The pieces are aligning?" "Care to share the picture they're forming?" I asked. "Not yet. There are still gaps." He turned to Fred. "You may go home now. Tell Ori to remain at the airport until Miss Whitfield departs by whatever means." After Fred left, Wolfe rang for beer. "While we wait for further developments, there is another angle to explore. Dr. Vance's files contained references to Arnold Whitfield's collecting activities in Europe during the 1950s. I want you to visit her at home tonight." "It's nearly midnight," I pointed out. "She will be awake," Wolfe said with certainty. "The document she received today will have guaranteed her insomnia." He was right, of course. When I arrived at Dr. Vance's Upper West Side apartment 20 minutes later, lights were visible behind the curtains, and she answered the door looking tired but alert, still in the clothes she'd worn earlier. "Mr. Goodwin," she said without surprise, "I suppose Mr. Wolfe has questions about the document." I followed her into a living room that looked like an extension of her office, books everywhere, framed art prints, and a desk buried under papers. A half-empty glass of scotch sat beside an open laptop. "He's interested in Arnold Whitfield's European buying trips," I said, "particularly in the 1950s. She sank into an armchair and gestured for me to take its companion. "I've been researching that very topic since this afternoon." She picked up a manila folder. "Whitfield made 17 trips to Europe between 1953 and 1959, purchasing primarily from dealers in Switzerland, Monaco, and Argentina." "Argentina?" "A haven for certain individuals after the war," she said carefully. "And their assets." "Nazi loot," I translated, "among other things." She removed a photograph from the folder. "This is from a gallery opening in Zurich, 1957, the month Whitfield supposedly acquired the Rembrandt." The black and white photograph showed a reception similar to the museum event I'd attended. In the center stood a younger Arnold Whitfield, recognizable from photos I'd seen at the gallery, speaking with a distinguished-looking man in a perfectly tailored suit. "Werner Kleinschmidt," Dr. Vance said, tapping the second man's image. "Art dealer, former Wehrmacht officer, and suspected handler of looted art. He died in 1962, conveniently before serious investigations into war plunder began." "And Whitfield bought from him?" "Extensively, always with paperwork that appeared legitimate, but originated with Kleinschmidt himself." She took a sip of scotch. The art world was accommodating in those days. Questions weren't asked if the provenance seemed plausible. "And the Rembrandt sketch?" "According to Whitfield's records, purchased from Kleinschmidt's private collection. Origin listed simply as European collector. Pre-war acquisition." Her laugh was bitter. "The standard euphemism for questionable provenance." I studied the photograph again. In the background, partially obscured, was a face that seemed oddly familiar. "May I borrow this?" I asked. "Keep it. I have a copy." She leaned forward. "Mr. Goodwin, there's something else you should know. Martin Reeves came to see me after the auction." That was unexpected. "The insurance investigator?" What did he want? He asked about international art restitution laws, specifically whether a museum that unknowingly acquired looted art could be criminally liable. She finished her scotch. "He's not just an insurance investigator. He works for the Art Recovery Project, a private organization that tracks down stolen art for the original owners or their heirs. Did Hobart know this? I believe so. In fact, I think Hobart contacted them initially when he first suspected the sketch's origins. I made a note of that, thinking of Reeves at the airport, watching Diane Whitfield and Victor Lang. The web was getting more tangled by the minute. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe still in the office, though it was well past his usual retirement time. He was studying something under the desk lamp, a small glass vial containing a dark liquid. "From Dr. Van Ryn," he explained before I could ask. 17th century ink formulated to match Rembrandt's for comparison purposes. I reported my conversation with Dr. Vance, showing him the photograph from Zurich. He examined it carefully, then placed it under the lamp and studied it through a magnifying glass. "Most illuminating," he murmured. "You recognize someone?" "Perhaps." He returned the photograph. "What time is it?" "Almost 2. Call Ori. I want to know if Ms. Whitfield has departed." I did, getting Ori on the first ring. "Still delayed," he reported. "But there's action now. Lang left about 20 minutes ago looking upset. Whitfield and Reeves are talking. Seems more cooperative than her conversation with Lang. The portfolio Fred mentioned is handcuffed to her wrist." I relayed this to Wolfe, who nodded thoughtfully. "Archie, I will need specific items for tomorrow," he said. "Call Saul first thing in the morning. I want him to bring Dr. Van Ryn here at 10, along with his testing equipment. Then contact Inspector Kramer. Tell him I have information about the Hobart murder, but it must be delivered in person." "He'll be thrilled," I remarked. "Also, invite Ms. Whitfield, Mr. Gilchrist, Ms. Kress, and Mr. Lang for noon." "The full gathering," I said. "You've solved it." Wolfe's expression was unreadable. "I have a theory that requires confirmation. One final test." He closed the ink vial carefully. The answer, as is often the case, was visible from the beginning. We simply needed to understand what we were seeing. He rose from his chair with his usual precision of movement. "Good night, Archie. Tomorrow will be a challenging day." I watched him make his measured way to the elevator, wondering what he had seen in that photograph or in Dr. Van Ryn's ink sample that had completed the puzzle for him. Whatever it was, he wasn't sharing yet, not unusual for Nero Wolfe in the final stages of a case. Outside, the city had grown quiet, with only the occasional distant siren or passing car breaking the late-night stillness. Somewhere in that darkness, a private plane waited to depart. A portfolio was handcuffed to a woman's wrist, and secrets decades old were threatening to emerge into the light. Tomorrow would indeed be challenging, but for whom remained to be seen. Chapter 8. The Final Stroke. By noon the next day, Wolfe's office had been arranged for what I recognized as his standard concluding performance. The yellow chairs were positioned in a semicircle facing his desk, with the red leather chair reserved for the primary player. Fritz had been instructed to prepare coffee and refreshments, and I had my notebook ready, though I knew most of what would transpire was already filed in Wolfe's mind. Dr. Van Ryn had arrived at 10 with Saul, carrying a worn leather case containing various scientific instruments. They had spent an hour with Wolfe behind closed doors, and when they emerged, the doctor looked both troubled and impressed. Saul wore his usual impassive expression, but there was a glint in his eye that told me we had something solid. Inspector Kramer arrived first among the invited guests, scowling and chewing an unlit cigar. "This better be good, Wolfe," he growled as I ushered him in. "I've got a press conference at 2. "It will be conclusive," Wolfe assured him from behind his desk. "Please make yourself comfortable." Melinda Kress arrived next, looking composed but wary. She chose the chair furthest from Kramer, Harold Gilchrist followed minutes later, his silver hair perfectly arranged, his manner suggesting he was doing us a favour by attending. Victor Lang arrived precisely at noon, glanced around the room with calculated indifference, and selected a chair near the globe. Diane Whitfield was the last to arrive at 12:07. She wore a tailored navy suit and the same emerald pendant. The slim portfolio Fred had mentioned was nowhere to be seen, but there was a faint red mark around her right wrist where the handcuff had been secured. "What an intriguing gathering," she remarked, taking the remaining yellow chair. "I feel as though I've been summoned to a drawing room in an Agatha Christie novel." "The comparison is apt," Wolfe said, "though I prefer more direct methods than Miss Marple." I had placed a small table beside Wolfe's desk, on which rested 2 items draped with cloth. Everyone's eyes were drawn to them, but no one asked the obvious question. "I have invited you here," Wolfe began, "because each of you has a connection to a Rembrandt sketch titled The Magus at Midnight and to the murder of James Hobart." Gilchrist shifted uncomfortably. "I don't see how making accusations in front of witnesses helps anyone, Mr. Wolfe." "I have made no accusations," Wolfe replied calmly. "Merely stated facts. Mr. Hobart was investigating the provenance of the sketch when he was killed. That, too, is a fact." "We all know this," Lang interjected. "The question is who killed him and why." "Precisely." Wolfe inclined his head toward Lang. "Let us begin with the sketches, yes, plural. 2 nearly identical Rembrandt drawings, one sold at auction, one stolen from the gallery during the sale." He removed the cloth from the first item on the table, revealing a framed sketch, the Rembrandt from the auction. "This sketch sold for $4.2 million to an anonymous buyer." Wolfe looked at Diane Whitfield. "Or perhaps not so anonymous." She met his gaze without flinching. "I have no idea what you mean." "The buyer was the Bergman Foundation, a Dutch organization dedicated to recovering art stolen from the Bergman family during Nazi occupation." Wolfe shifted his attention to Kramer. "Ms. Whitfield serves on its board of directors, a fact she neglected to mention to anyone at Gilchrist Gallery." Kramer's eyes narrowed. "Is this true?" "My personal affiliations are private," she replied coolly. "Not when they constitute a conflict of interest in a murder investigation," Kramer countered. "The Bergman Foundation," Wolfe continued, "hired Martin Reeves to investigate the sketch's authenticity before the auction. They suspected, correctly, that it had been stolen from their family collection in 1942. Gilchrist's professional composure cracked slightly. "If there were provenance issues, they should have been brought to our attention through proper channels." "They were," Wolfe said, "by James Hobart, who discovered discrepancies in the documentation. He contacted Anton Schiller, an art recovery specialist, for verification. Their dinner meeting the night before Hobart's murder was to discuss his findings." Melinda Crest leaned forward. "Are you saying James knew the sketch was stolen property?" "He suspected it," Wolfe confirmed, "and that suspicion cost him his life." He lifted the cloth from the second item, a small glass container holding a dark liquid, and several strips of paper with ink markings. Dr. Van Ryn conducted tests this morning on ink samples from both sketches. His findings were remarkable. Wolfe's eyes moved around the semicircle. Both sketches use authentic 17th century ink formulations, but they are different formulations. Dr. Van Ryn cleared his throat. "The auctioned sketch uses an iron gall ink consistent with Rembrandt's early period. The second sketch, the one that was stolen, uses a sepia ink he favoured later. Both are authentic to the period." "Which means what, exactly?" Lang asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "It means," Wolfe said, "that both sketches are genuine Rembrandt works." A moment of stunned silence followed. "That's impossible," Gilchrist protested. "They're virtually identical." "Not identical," Wolfe corrected. "Similar enough to be confused by casual examination, but with subtle differences in line weight, shading, and composition. Rembrandt, like many masters, occasionally created multiple versions of the same subject, studies, variations, refinements." "So there were two originals all along?" Kramer asked incredulously. "Yes. The Bergman family owned both, the earlier version displayed publicly, the later kept in their private collection. When the Nazis confiscated their gallery in 1942, both were taken." Wolfe turned to Diane Whitfield. "The later version eventually reached Arnold Whitfield through Werner Kleinschmidt in 1957. The earlier version remained missing until recently." Diane's composure didn't waver, but her hand moved unconsciously to her emerald pendant. "The second sketch," Wolfe continued, "appeared shortly before the auction presented by Warren Chambers, a fabricated identity. This sketch was the earlier version, smuggled out of Europe by Anton Schiller at the Bergman Foundation's request." "For what purpose?" Kramer demanded. "To create confusion," Wolfe explained. "To force an authentication crisis that would delay the auction while experts determined which was genuine, a process that would inevitably reveal the sketch's true provenance." Melinda Kress gasped softly. "James must have figured it out. That's why he called Dr. Vance that morning." "Yes," Wolfe agreed. "Unfortunately, someone else realized what was happening and silenced him before he could act." His eyes moved deliberately to Victor Lang, who had gone very still. "Mr. Lang has been acquiring looted art for decades, operating through various galleries and auction houses. When Hobart threatened to expose the Rembrandt's origins, Lang arranged his murder." Lang's face flushed with anger. "That's absurd. You have no evidence." "On the contrary," Wolfe said, "the murder weapon was found in your hotel room safe this morning, a small caliber pistol with ballistics matching the bullet that killed Hobart. Also found was documentation connecting you to Werner Kleinschmidt, visible in this photograph from 1957, where you appear as his assistant." Wolfe gestured to me, and I placed the Zurich photograph on his desk, now marked to identify a younger Victor Lang in the background. Lang glanced at the exits, calculating. Kramer was already on his feet, and I had positioned myself between Lang and the door. "You orchestrated the theft of the second sketch during the auction," Wolfe continued, "intending to eliminate evidence of the dual originals. You needed the sale to proceed without questions about provenance that might lead to other pieces you've handled over the years." With surprising speed for a man his age, Lang lunged for the door. I intercepted him easily, applying just enough pressure to his arm to make him reconsider. Kramer was beside us in seconds, handcuffs ready. "Victor Lang, you're under arrest for the murder of James Hobart," Kramer said, the words clearly satisfying him. As they led Lang out, Diane Whitfield approached Wolfe's desk. "The Bergman Foundation thanks you," she said quietly. "Both sketches will be returned to the family's heirs." "And your uncle's role in purchasing looted art?" Her expression was complicated: pride, regret, determination. "We can't change the past, Mr. Wolfe, but we can try to make amends." After they had all departed, Wolfe leaned back in his chair and rang for beer. Fritz arrived promptly with a tray. "Dr. Vance will be sending your fee tomorrow," I reminded him after Fritz had gone. $40,000 for 3 days' work." "Satisfactory," Wolfe said, pouring his beer with precision, though the true value was in the resolution, justice after all these years. "And 2 authentic Rembrandts returned to their rightful owners," I added. "Indeed." He took a careful sip of beer. "Art endures, Archie, while those who covet it come and go, a lesson Rembrandt himself understood well." I made a final note in my logbook and closed it, marking the end of the case. Outside, spring sunshine filled West 35th Street, illuminating the red door of the brownstone with the same golden light that Rembrandt had captured in his sketch of the Magus, a seeker of truth bent over ancient mysteries, finding meaning in the darkness through the simple power of illumination. Thanks for joining us for the Rembrandt Ultimatum. Did you suspect Victor Lang before Wolfe revealed his connection to the art dealer Kleinschmidt? Were you intrigued by the twist that both sketches were actually originals? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this adventure with Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin, don't forget to hit subscribe for more mysteries daily. Until next time, remember Wolfe's wisdom. The truth is often visible from the beginning. We simply need to understand what we're seeing. This is Alfie signing off from Cafe Stories.